Yeah, welcome to the Zal Strength Podcast. I'm joined today by my good friends, my good friend Jim, my coach mentor, someone who's taught me a lot about processes of how to view the coach client relationship, and my good friend Seba, I'd say my spiritual running partner. We vibe heavy on our meditation and consciousness exploring ideas, and also I'm Tyson. So
I'm joined here today with Tyson Eckel, who is, I think, been so influential in expanding my ability to communicate with people that I maybe have less familiarity with. There are so many things that can be directly applied to coaching that you could have been taught at an early age, but likely weren't. For example, just making sure that, when you're interacting with someone new or someone that you don't know, establishing a baseline of consent. As someone who comes from a very open family, who's very open with ideas and I have a high level of comfort with a lot of things that, if you're working with a client they might be much different than you, and they might be interested in a core piece of what you are about. But then there are so many small things that make a big difference. And so Tyson has taught me a lot about that, how to interact with people in a way that's I can not self-consenting, but consenting. Consensual relationships are more than just your romantic relationships. Which I think as coaches, we can all utilize in a very, in a really important way, to make sure our clients are happy and, not feeling violated, So that's one awesome, great thing about Tyson. And Seba, Seba and I have such a great, relationship, because I actually started coaching Seba when I was 21, 22, maybe 23.
No.
I don't know how old I was. It feels like such a long time. I mean, that was gotta be 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I was gotta be at 23. And so my relationship with Seba has evolved a lot in that at first I was kind of bringing Seba down from I don't know, or up, I guess, from training hell, You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I come from a very, I've never been someone who's been able to push really hard all the time without a direct consequence. And working with you, the first programming strategies that I saw were super high volume, high frequency. Honestly, the amount of volume, high everything. I remember people would say oh, you can't do high volume, high frequency, and high intensity. There has to be you know what I mean? That was always a good thing. And people was yes, I can. What do you mean?
Watch me.
Watch me. So now I feel obviously, because we're all coaches on the team, there's such a. I'm so glad that I was able to bring you into that, so that then we could get both all three of us collectively into a new space of the other extreme, I guess, and a really intuitive training style where obviously Seba still has a much higher training capacity than me. But sounds like from our conversations, you've been able to find a much more sustainable and useful training approach for your new and changing I guess material conditions as you work your way up into the academia of psychology, and hopefully clinical psychology.
Hopefully. I was just thinking about what you both said, and I would say you both it's I'm defining you through me now, but the impact you had on me, and I would say you both helped me trust myself. You as a coach, I remember there was once the moment where I was so obsessed with learning more shit, and you were at some point you were just dude, at some point you just got to get out there and apply your methods and trust and learn from them. And I was just so lost in reading more and like all of these things. And also like, I feel like as an athlete to like relax, trust it, like, dude, maybe you don't need 70 sets of back, like 40 do well too, it's like, no, but for real, because I was so stuck in this like very neurotic headspace that like I just didn't, it's almost like I didn't know that less might work just as well, or like, equally well, but I would have like more flexibility with things, like more space, more peace, training. And and I feel like you, Tyson, it's like it's almost like you generated like an emotional trust in me, like where I really needed it. Like I was, when we initially met, going through like identity shifts from academically or professionally, like switching from like exercise science to somewhere else where I didn't know yet where to go. And I remember the first time I came here, and like I was still like, I remember like in a much more neurotic headspace, and I was at your place, and I was like, I don't know, like mapping out what I need to do on the day, and like I need to do this and X, Y, and Z. And like being with you was like very free flowing. And I was like, Jesus fucking Christ, like it's like how can this be? Like, how can you live that way? And interestingly enough, at the end of the day, everything got done. Like I like everything I needed to do was done. And I was like, oh, like there's a way to like, experience like your day without being neurotic and still doing shit. And I feel like I've really like, these two things have like really stayed with me. Like, for instance, like trusting in the whole like process of like coaching, and like also like, I guess being more open is like what I learned from you with my clients. I'm very content, for instance, also like sometimes like losing clients if it is not the best for them or for me, like not, I don't know, clinging to like a relationship which is not fruitful. And like really like, I don't know, digging deeper into like coach-client relationship and not just like imposing, I don't know, my ideas on like whatever is best for the person, And yeah, like same for you with like I guess different elements in my life, but I feel like it's a very holistic thing that like it feels very integrated, because I can tell like the last time I was here was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it feels like, I don't know, the impact you both had on me, like flowered, it became more. So it's like, now it's like, oh, like, yeah, I mean, I'm still like the same person with like training and everything, but it's like I'm much more relaxed, coaching and training, and yeah.
You can see it. I can feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you remember when when I was here and like we trained for like 3 hours, but I still had like 5 sets left. And dude,
go.
And you,
I
remember we came back and you were like eating outside with your family, and like, and I was like downstairs, like finishing my training.
Yeah.
The 5 sets, like doing side laterals, bro.
I forgot. You're like, I gotta go home. Yeah, we can leave, but I gotta finish my training at your house. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that definitely changed, but like, not saying that I wouldn't do that anymore, but it's like there is no pressure to do it. Like I don't feel like I need to. And this is like, I enjoy it, but it's like if I don't have the ability to do it, I'm not like sitting in the corner like cringing, like a fuck. So yeah,
that's awesome. Cool. I have so many thoughts that I wanted to expand upon, especially like you brought up how the roles or the way that you relate to your clients has shifted, and like kind of being comfortable with like letting clients go if it's not the right fit. And we had a chat last night about like the role of a coach, and actually Michael asked us, should I refer to him as Michael on the podcast?
Yeah, Michael.
Yeah. Michael was saying like, do you think you could coach me? And I said like, I mean, yeah, I do. But then also like I immediately thought, well, I couldn't write your program because he's not a type of person that's going to follow my program. He's like at the core of his program. Like he is he drives those decisions.
Yeah.
And I don't think that will ever change. It could change, but right now, no, it's not how that dynamic would work. And then it made me really think about what it is to coach someone. Like what is our role as coaches? And I think it is in a large way to influence and help provide the right conditions or help the athlete find the right conditions for their own growth and sustained growth. And when the conditions are there, if you're able to achieve that with an athlete, the way that you coach could then evolve from there, because now like they have the right conditions, but maybe, for example, have clients where like I'm really just there as a sounding board.
Yeah.
I don't even write the program, but that communication that we have, weekly is so awesome. Honestly, just like knowing that someone values like a conversation with me every week, and then they take that information to like, do something continue along their path.
One of my favorite parts about working with like the variety of clientele that I have, like I work with a lot of like absolute beginners, like really just starting their strength journey to the other side of the spectrum. But like each person has like a different need, finding a way to meet them where they're at. Like some clients where it's literally just like we sit down and have a conversation about like, okay, here's how's training been going for you. We might like have some creative problem solving on a couple of like movements or change a few rep protocols, but it's very like they're driving a ton of the training decisions. And I have some people where I'm like making all of the training decisions for them, but I'm like inviting them in my thought process and why I make them. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that need, knowing what the need is. I think that's what I even asked, like Michael, like, well, I can coach you, but like, I need to know what your needs are. What are your intentions? Like, what are you trying to get out of your relationship with me, but also like, what's driving your training decisions? Mm-hmm. And I think speaking of like, expanding upon the idea of intuitive training, the intuition is supposed to come from like a core of like, where are we going to go? What's the point? Mm-hmm. If you don't have like an overall objective, it is really challenging to train intuitively, because then like, why train if you don't know if there's no goal? Which also kind of makes me think about this idea of like presence versus like, I don't know if anxiety is the opposite of being present, but like we all have somewhat of an assumption that we're going to be alive like next week. And something that I think about a lot is, if I'm going to be alive next week or next month or next year, hopefully for many of them, but like, what do I want to do right now so that the future version of me is also like satisfied and like, I want to make sure that next week version of me has improved. And so like, yes, it's very important to be present with the moment with your intuitive training, but like that decision you're making is as much about what are your feelings and your emotions and your like sensations right now. But then the decision is also like, with that information, what we do now will have an impact on tomorrow. And so we have to think about the future while also being present. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I feel like intuition is like, a lot of people, when they like shit on intuition, is like they've never really explored intuition. And intuition is like similarly a skill like thinking, writing. It's like, it's something which is ingrained in us. Like everyone knows intuition. But like seeing the value, like for instance, seeing the value of like, sharpening your mind by like writing a lot or something like that, you only really see like, oh, I'm actually able to, get better and like improve these skills if I like do it. And then you also end up seeing the value. And I noticed for me with intuition that first of all, intuition gets better. It's not like a static skill where like you tap into it and it's like, oh no, I'm like perfectly intuitive. And it's also that it is actually responsive to a framework. So it's like, if you have an intent, let's say you're just like, I'm 3 months out of a meet. I actually want to be the best at the meet I can be. So in your mind, you're like, all right, like this is where my intention lies. And then it contextualizes all of the training decisions which you spontaneously make in that moment. It's like, I notice when I have like certain, things which go into the framework of intuition, that like my whole intuition is shaped by them. So like my spontaneity, like I guess like fits still long-term goals. It's not just like random intuition of like, oh, my mood right now is to like X, Y, and Z, and there's no point in it.
Yeah.
And I think this is what was so interesting, because like the more I did that, the more I noticed how like intuition takes takes in a bigger breadth of information. So it's like sometimes if you like analyze things, you're really stuck on like single factors, but like intuition takes in like recovery, like mood, then also like your understanding of training, injury, pain. And then you get this weird sense of like, oh shit, like I shouldn't squat today.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like, well, I have a meet coming up, but maybe I should pull forward my bench session today and try to squat tomorrow. It might be a smarter decision, you know? And it's like, I think often the mind plays this trick of like, if I let intuition in, like everything else is like not of value anymore. And it's like, no, but it's like at the same time, completely discrediting intuition is a mistake. And people never end up seeing the value because they never end up like training it properly. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like in terms of like the coach-client relationship more so, it's like, it's not intuition. You cannot program intuition. It's not like, you know, I program you 3 intuition today. But three today 4 RP8 intuition. But like you said, like you need to figure out what they want themselves, and then you can be like trying to, I guess, like lead in a way, or like make them lead themselves. I feel like this is more like invite them to like, I don't know, follow certain intuitions they're having, and maybe like questioning other ones where it's like, you know, why do you feel X, Y, and Z? It's like it's not like there's not a training process behind that. But yeah, I feel like this is sometimes the most fruitful process. And one of the things I noticed is sometimes that some people have also like a certain like cognitive dissonance. So for instance, on the one hand, there's like maybe deep down they actually want X, but like they think they want Y. And I noticed that this sometimes comes out because it's like they're like, oh, like actually, you know, I'd be happy like training that way. And I look actually for enjoyment in my training, and I look for it to be like, you know, I want to be more explosive or whatever. And it's like, but maybe consciously they like just chase this one goal where they think this is really what they want. And I notice with intuition brings this sometimes out. They're like, oh, like I was actually following something which was not what I wanted. And this can sometimes be a trouble, I notice, because for some people, it's like they're so, and this is obviously like they're allowed to do that, but they're so stuck in what they want to do that then you're not the right coach for them. Because in order to keep them going, you would literally need to impose a framework, which, you know, maybe resembles the thought they had, which also came from the outside. It was like, oh, you got to be this, you know, and then you're like, okay, I'm the coach for you because I can like throw all of these things on you.
It is hard to, like, that's the hard thing when you're interacting with like another human being with like all of their collective experiences, and like you don't necessarily know where they're getting their information. You know, like we've got some accounts that I think really make it challenging to, like, when it comes to pain, for example, we've got like Squat University that, you know, makes everything seemingly from the lens of like just purely biomechanics. And then like if you're influenced heavily by that, then like maybe your intuition would drive you to like always focus on your technique, you know, or like, oh, if I don't have good technique, then it's not even a good lift, even though I'm squatting 20 pounds heavier. It's like because my knees caved or something. And then that kind of it makes it challenging to, yeah, it's hard to know what to do depending on where they're coming from. But you mentioned like kind of enabling or like allowing them to lean into their intuition. Something that I found that is really like, helpful and it makes sense, I think, is just there's a gap between what you know about the lifter and what you know about what they want. Like, so they might have a desire that they want to get really strong, but you don't know what that means to them, or what they know about powerlifting, or what they know about squat. Like there's so many variables that you have to learn. And so when I'm working with a client, like that is number one goal, is to try to understand as much as possible about what they know right now and what I can teach them that would be helpful and in alignment with their goals.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot, because with me being in like bodybuilding and like powerlifting and also the competitive spaces of both sports, and also I would say there's a difference between the different federations in bodybuilding and also like the coaches who cluster in the different federations. But what I noticed that there's a very strong recent trend that the coach becomes a bigger and bigger authority and takes more and more credit. So like I, for instance, hear the phrase of like, this is my roster, like my roster of athletes, and literally also like coaches deciding when a client steps on stage or not. So it's like, like you're not ready yet for, and if the client is in alignment with that and says, well, all right, like this is fair, like I want to get first place, and in order to get that, this is just the hard truth, fair. But sometimes I also notice that it's very often like the coach driving the decision to like, satisfy his own needs. Yeah, and it's like, I don't know, I feel like this is obviously very different from like our methodology. But I feel like there's a bigger and bigger like gap growing between like on the one hand like an authority who imposes a lot of will on the clients, and some people look for that. But I also notice like a lot of people are starting to burn out from that and look for something different. And it's like almost like an invitation, to like bring them into a space where they feel comfortable like leading themselves and like looking for what they're actually enjoying. And it may or may not be into like more intuitive training. But yeah, I feel like I went off a rabbit hole. No,
I enjoyed all of that. Yeah. Something that I feel like I wanted to ask Seba about or get more from Seba on, like for me, my own training, my own body, pretty unplanned. Like every session, I genuinely don't really know what I'm gonna. Sometimes I might have a sense of like I think I might deadlift today, but like it's very like spontaneous, and your training has a bit more structure to it, a part of like your life conditions and like schooling and everything. But I just like your application of like intuition, like within the structure and framework you have, like it. After doing some really fun, intense training sessions with you, like following like what you've been doing, like I'm excited to invite a little bit more structure into my training. So yeah, I guess I want you to talk about that a little bit more. So yeah, however much you want to talk about the structure.
Yeah, the way one word which came to my mind is like degrees of freedom. So it's like if you're completely intuitive, you have the max amount of degrees of freedom. It's like you can move how you want to, you can like select whatever you want to. And like there's obviously, I mean, we all had like a lot of training in basic exercise science and training methodologies. There's something to be said to like do something like repetitively, like have the same exercise, do it repetitively. And I noticed for myself, like where my goals are at, for instance, like saying like, oh, all right, like I'm doing power building. I want to be pretty strong at those exercises. Those ones matter less to me. I can like switch them in and out if I want to. But also recognizing that like body, like in a way, like a body doesn't fight growth, but like it's resistant, right? It's like if you impose, like if you want to grow faster and you impose more stress, it's like it's less comfortable. And intuition sometimes, if there's the right environmental conditions, you can have lots of degrees of freedom and like grow, as like you're the best example, and you can grow very, very well. But sometimes also rigidity invites to like, I guess, impose the stress you can impose, but also like, I guess, I know how to like say that.
Almost like invites creativity. You have to be creative with a little more rigidity.
Yeah, it's I noticed that I take out the degrees of freedom there where I know I need to like keep the stimulus alive to go where I want to go. So it's like if I have a long day in school and I know like, oh, like, if I would be completely intuitive, I would probably back off with training stress quite a bit today. So it's like, I know it's like the training stress is for me the most crucial point. So it's like, this is for me, like becomes a given variable. Not saying that it needs to be 100% like max out, but like it becomes for me like a more like strict point.
There has to be training stress.
There has to be. And like for me, usually I'm like, because this is the most important variable, I'm like, okay, I try to keep it as high as possible without breaking with what I'm doing. And then the other degrees of freedom are all the variables I can manipulate, which would improve training, which would improve enjoyment, which would improve all of these things without taking away from my primary goal. And I think this is where I noticed that if I'm, for instance, like fatigued from a long day, I might be able to get away with like more degrees of freedom. But then I notice, oh, it might actually introduce more stress because I don't have the mental capacity to like really be like, I don't know, explorative and creative in every single moment. And also like knowing that like if I follow that structure, I will certainly get the training stress I'm looking for. If I feel like it's too much, I can switch out exercises, I can reduce sets, I can reduce intensity, I can change tempo, and I do all of these things. And this is, I guess, where for me the framework comes in. And it's really interesting because I noticed that the framework itself underlies intuition and flexibility too. So it's like nothing says that like just because you have a framework that the framework needs to be static. The framework itself is static. But like there is a moment where you could, for instance, say like, oh, like the framework, how I've been doing it for the past 3 months doesn't seem to really hold up that well anymore. So it's like you could say like, oh, well, then let's change it for now, or like have a phase where there's maybe no framework or like an altered framework. But I think that has been very crucial for me because I noticed that like ultimately, like for where I try to go with my training, it is like there's moments where it just is uncomfortable and I enjoy it. Like I enjoy like living on that edge sometimes of the uncomfortableness. But I need to restrict the degrees of freedom sometimes. And it feels, honestly, sometimes also easier because
Makes sense. Yeah.
the creativity almost feels like too much.
Yeah, it can be. It can be.
Yeah.
That's how I feel with like the offseason, like after the competition. And I was like, because I didn't really know what my goals were after that. Because like I was really excited about the meet. I had a good time. It was awesome. And then I know that I like training, but what do I want from it? I still kind of been figuring it out. I think, because I was going to ask you, like, what you said, like, in alignment with your goals, like, what are your goals given your new, you have a lot more, I mean, maybe not, but it sounds like you got a lot more stress, a lot more focus and attention on school and all these other things that come along with being a foreign student. What are your like training goals? Like what motivates them?
So maybe just to contextualize like my environmental factors, the gym I'm going to is 30 minutes away from where I'm living. I don't have a car, my girlfriend has a car. So it's like I can never make a spontaneous decision to just go to the gym, even if I have the time. It's always like, checking with her and seeing if it fits. I would say like my capacity for training stress is very variable. It varies a lot. So it's like sometimes like I have less school stress in terms of like actually like physiologically stressful, but sometimes it's like just like I have more time limitations, and I just know like, oh, if I have X, Y, and Z as a framework, like I get enough training in for what I want to do. My goals right now, I notice, is just like I don't know. My pendulum always swung between like powerlifting, bodybuilding, and I never was able to like really dedicate to one. It almost made me feel weird because I was like, oh, like I'm really strong right now, but my quads look smaller. Fuck, like I don't like it. Or like the other way around, I'm like, dang, like that deadlift feels really off after like not deadlifting for a while. So now it's like I just noticed, oh, like my identity as a lifter is exactly in the middle. And like I want to maximize both aspects without taking away from the rest of my life. And this is just like knowing for how advanced I am as a lifter now. It's just like, well, shit, if my training is too chill, like there's just not that much happening anymore. It's like there might be chill days, but like for me to grow, like I just can't have super chill training sessions anymore. I feel like I never had super chill training sessions. But yeah, for me, it's like, I think this is like the overall goal. It's just like, okay, maximize whatever, like in these two areas, what I, have capacity for. And then like the framework gets adapted based on, what my current life situations are. And within this framework, I'm completely spontaneous and intuitive. And I notice sometimes like, I cling a little bit to the framework, and I notice like after a few days, I'm like, oh, like this was like, I should, allow for a little more freedom right now because I start to get pain here and there. And like, I've been a little bit too much in like a mechanical like rut. And then I changed it, and I feel like I've become quicker recognizing that. Like I'm like, sometimes I was like 2 weeks in and I was like, oh shit, like maybe you should not have like done 2 more weeks of like 7-plate hack squats. Like that was not, and then like the consequence come and I need to really pull back more harshly for like 1 or 2 weeks. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like this is probably where I'm at right now. Yeah.
There's an idea that Tyson and we have a video coming out about it, but I wanted to highlight it because it's just been on my mind. It's a learning method called the action reflection learning method. It's more or less how most people learn if they're being intentional about learning. But like with lifting, it's really awesome because every session provides like a learning experience, a learning opportunity. And the process is basically you have an action or behavior that you partake in. So 7 sets of hack squats or whatever would be maybe one action that you took in within the goal of maybe bigger quads or whatever the like outcome is. Then you have a reflection period where you're reflecting on how useful and how valuable that action was on the outcome, on the goal that you have. And then you have action prime, ideally, if you're reflecting well enough on the action. The next action after that, ideally, is an improvement or an evolution of the previous action, whether it's like the action itself or how you frame the action, how you're like the magnification of that action, like how hard are you going or like what's your mindset around it. And then there's also like reflection prime, meaning if you don't have a process of reflection, it's hard to improve. You need to be okay with recognizing that the decisions that you're making aren't the most optimal every single time. I mean, they can't be because we're all always impacted by different stimuli every single day. So the decisions you're making about the action 2 weeks ago were influenced by the experiences you had leading up to 2 weeks ago. So when you give yourself a stimulus, i.e. an action, your response to that action changes and your understanding of the impact of that can change. And so I think that's where like the intuition can really become, it is a skill because like learning about yourself is a skill. Learning about and reflecting upon these decisions is a skill. And I guess one of my main hopes for clients is that they develop that skill. Mm-hmm. Because when we're writing programs, especially with an athlete that's never, like if there's a huge gap between like their education on like exercise science or like just like if their framework has a lot of holes or limitations, I guess, like it doesn't hold up to the most extreme of experiences, then we can kind of educate over time, and I like to include block reviews within my athletes every block to help with that reflection process and to help them ask questions that like you and I, we all ask ourselves pretty much every session, I think at this point, where we write them down so that they know kind of how we think and like we can actually teach this process and this framework as a skill and less of maybe how some people perceive it as like you are a static person who will use their like genetically infused intuition that doesn't change to dictate all of your training sessions from here on out. Yeah,
I think one of the biggest strengths with this learning, I like the summary you gave, is that intuition also really encourages sensitivity to the moment. It's just like intuition itself can guide you, but it also makes you like much more receptive listening.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a plan, like a lot of people, it's just like, you just do the plan and you're not sensitive to what happens. Yeah. And this really changes the learning process because if you're like moment to moment sensitive, you're like, oh, this set was, I don't know, like doesn't even need a label, right? But like you do the set and you're like, well, that was pretty intense. Or like it was like X, Y, and Z, or it hurt, or it was like, it felt like off, like the movement felt off or shit like that. Where previously, sometimes you'd like, I have single leg Bulgarians today. I'm going to do the single leg Bulgarians, independent what they feel like. You're just like, coach said it, I will do it.
Yeah. I have a single at an 8 and 3 back offs at 5 reps. And like, I will do that no matter what.
Yeah. And it's like interesting because like even if like for instance, let's say you as a coach, maybe you encourage feedback after the week or after the blog, it's like a lot of people might not even remember because they were not sensitive to it. It's
or educated on how to reflect.
Yeah. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like this is also where one of the big strengths lies, or one of the biggest strengths of intuition lie, because it's like you become more intuitive to like present moment awareness. And this can also be used for analysis. It's like, it's not like, it's like not, I guess, like mutually exclusive from analysis. It's actually, it helps analysis,
It's analysis is I think a necessity to improve upon your own intuition. Like education is, like as you mentioned earlier, like our intuition is influenced by all the things that we've ever experienced and how we've reflected and how we've learned and what we've learned and who we learned it from and their bias and like, and so that can change.
Yeah.
As you, I mean, shit, man, we all probably thought like, I don't know, I thought starting strength was like the GOAT program, like it was for everyone. Ironically, I really like fives.
So you're saying sets of five.
But the analysis of why was always the thing that made me not always, but as I learned more, it's like, well, why? He didn't have an answer. Mark didn't. He just like, well, it's in the middle of 1 and 10. So like hypertrophy is 10 and strength is 1. So 5 is good in middle. And like, actually, it turns out it is a pretty good middle ground. You know? I really like that rep range, especially from a back off work. But I understand why now. I think like, understanding the principles of like mechanical tension and hypertrophy and motor unit recruitment and all these other things give a lot more confidence and belief in your own ability to make these decisions. Because like we talked about yesterday, it's just like an ongoing idea I have, but or hypothesis, I guess, that like as long as you have, like let's say you do 1 set of bicep curls, 1 hard set above let's just say RP6, because that appears to be like the threshold for like, a hypertrophic stimulus. If you did 1 bicep curl set at RP6 a week, like I think it would be very likely that your bicep will still grow. Will it grow an inch over a year, a quarter? I don't know, but like it should theoretically grow from just 1 set a week, but it won't be optimal. But it's still movement in the right direction if your goal is hypertrophy. It's very slim margin of growth, but recognizing that like it's actually really challenging to do something that's really hard and not get a positive stimulus from it unless you're doing too much, ironically. Because like, and that's where we actually discussed last night, like how do you know what your limit is if you've never experienced it? I've experienced my limit many times, and I think what I mean by that is when I push really hard and I do a lot of sets, given my normal lifestyle, like sitting down and editing on my computer for 5-6 hours a day sometimes, a lot of training stress doesn't seem to lead to comfort in my body. Pain tends to arise, things like that. And so I'm a lot more hesitant to doing like training, and that honestly both of you guys do sometimes in the gym. Like I'm good with like 1 or 3 hard sets for my legs. If I get more than that, that's awesome. But I used to be like, I'm not a good lifter because I can't get 15 sets of leg work in a session. And it's actually something my clients bring up a lot. It's like they feel bad when they don't complete all of the sets in the program because they didn't know that it was okay to do less. Because when you're saying like, hey, you can do 1 to 3 sets of back off sets.
I always thought I need to do 3.
Yeah.
Like, 1 to 3, 3.
Yeah. And if you do less, it's because you're a weak baby.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, I mean, like I guess as I've learned more like science behind muscle hypertrophy, 1 hard set is sufficient for growth, and we're not. And none of my athletes are lifting their legs once a week. So like, it's okay if not every single session you elicit the most amount of like hypertrophy, because we're kind of assuming that athletes are training for years, and there are going to be days where you push and you find your limit. You're like, well, that was the limit. Maybe you get hurt. And you hopefully have a good set of resources to minimize the impact of that pain. So you can come back and approach things differently. I mean, the athletes that work with me the longest they've almost everyone's experienced a period of training where like their pec hurts or the shoulder or the quad or the knee, and we need to pull down the stress almost always, or rethink about the recovery variables or are we meditating enough? Are we getting enough like walking during the day? But anyway, the point is that assuming we are going to be training longer than like this one moment in time, it's made me feel much more okay with finding what is sufficient for growth instead of what is optimal for growth, which as a younger lifter, I'll only want to do optimal, baby. You know, I think Tyson's like it maybe influenced me a lot in that, like whether you knew it or not, just like that self-consenting idea that you bring up. Like, I don't know, depending on who you look up to, they're like, oh, you got to get that discipline, man. You got to keep pushing. You got to keep going. And that, because that's how they've responded. That's what worked for them. But like every time I've tried to like ignore my body senses, not every time, but like a lot of times now that I have a lot of experience, I feel like I know what my body is telling me.
Yeah, ignoring it repeatedly, like there's a destination at the end of that road. You may not,
Yeah.
like you can get away for however long, but
Yeah.
it eventually, like something, you're just more accident prone in a sense. But,
Well, and you don't know what it means to ignore your body until you have the consequence.
yeah.
Because like you could be ignoring it because you don't know what your limit is, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But if your experiences have told you that at this threshold of training stress or these many sets or this RPE over this much time tends to have a very common like pain or like discomfort or reduction in strength or whatever it is that you aren't, the antithesis of the goal, then ignoring your body is not utilizing your intuition correctly. It's ignoring your intuition and being not dogmatic, but like too strict about the variables and not listening to the variables that are more subjective.
I also noticed that a lot of the people who are interested in intuitive training, they've usually all reached a breaking point, because a lot of people like got introduced like in this, like I need to say like all the, I guess, like values I learned, like, you know, persistence, discipline, and also sometimes like pushing through like hard episodes is what I really appreciate in strength sport. You know, it's not like that I'm like, there's no point in that.
Yeah.
But it's like, I think people grow up so much in this like mindset, and I feel like it has gotten more and more. So like in the gym where I'm training right now, like you see really young lifters with like a really intense try hard mentality, where it's like, well, I was a teenage and junior lifter, you know, and at the end of my junior years, like I had a period of burnout, and I was like, well, that was certainly related to how I trained back then. And it's like the people I see now, it's like, well, for me, I see them, I'm like, it's good for them, like that they're so passionate about it. But it's like, it almost feels like just a matter of time till they hit a breaking point. And I noticed with some people I spoke to, it's not like that I want to push certain ideas on them, but you can tell that like they're not receptive till they break. And the only thing you can do is almost like hope that the breaking itself is kind of a gentle break.
Yeah, that doesn't break them to the point that they like stop.
Mhm.
Stop. Like,
Yeah. It's just like and it doesn't need to be the body. It could also be mentally, you know. It's just like some hefty like life situation comes up and they're just
COVID
like,
happens.
yeah, something like that. And they're in a situation where it's like, maybe they didn't enjoy their training. All of a sudden they need to train somewhere where it's just not nice training. Both things come together. It's like, dude, like I don't want to train, right? The only way where you maybe would have kept training was if you would have like enjoyed your training, you know? So it's like these things where it's like, oh, like, yeah, I don't know. It made me much more aware of like where people are coming from, and also like the general like strength culture we're like in and inhabiting. And developing. Yeah, I there's like this. I get more like going back. Like there's more and more coaches where I feel like it's like an abusive type relationship. You know, where you're like
At least toxic.
Yeah, and I would even say like abusive too.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's toxic and also abusive, and I'm like, man, this is like, yeah, it's like too bad, you know, because it's like there could be so much more nourishing. I guess like
a lot of like gaslighting.
Yeah, gaslighting. Yeah,
Like it's not. I don't know how intentional it is, but I do think that's like it's such a accepted way of thinking about your feelings. Is to just like, don't think about them. They don't matter. Your body can push so hard. When I drink alcohol, I can do all my sets. It doesn't matter. But like when it comes to like sustainability, you know, we talk a lot about our physical sensations, and like pain is maybe a reason to like limit your training. But also, I've been really pushing the like a training enjoyment as like a driver for decision making. Like I always, not always, but I've been saying a lot to my clients, like, what would be exciting for you? What would be what rep range would be really exciting for you right now? What would kind of get you to drive as much energy to the muscle for this moment in time?
50s, bro.
That's a 50. But like, within powerlifting, you're not going to, I mean, maybe you'll do 20. You guys might do 20 reps.
But not for long, bro. Like, I'm like, one day it's like, oh, I feel 20s today. And then afterwards, I'm like, dude, like, not for the next 6 months again.
Yeah. And I think like if that's actually a really good example. Like some days you're like, you know what? Let's see how many I can just do for as many reps as possible.
Yeah.
And that's exciting. And like, yeah, you're going to have a stimulus that's unknown. You don't know your response to that stimulus. But in the moment, like, again, assuming you don't have, let's say if you're wrong, if the consequences are relatively minimal, like if you have a competition coming up and the day before you decide to do a set of 20 on squat, like, okay, maybe that's not a good idea to experiment with ideas,
But that's the framework we were talking about, It's like, there's still a framework. It's not like you're just like...
Yeah, but yeah, like what's exciting will be influenced by what your needs are.
Exactly, yeah.
So like if you're... Right now, I feel like I just want to get bigger.
Yeah.
And so I've been picking exercises that feel comfortable, that I can push hard. Like in my legs, in my butt, in my hip, my hamstrings, and my biceps, and my chest, and my shoulders, and all of them. Except for my quad, my calves.
Calves, bro.
I have not been excited for that. Like, I'm like, oh, I'll get excited. And I'm like, no, I don't really care that much about my calf.
It's weird, dude. Like,
Yeah.
I would struggle to train calves here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, here, yeah.
You could do it on these little things, but
for sure.
like, I don't know. I just don't like, I mean, they're fine. Like my calves are fine. They could be bigger, but I don't care that much.
That's fine.
And so like, that's something I know about myself, but it's also been really fun because like when I can't get to Los and I can't train there and I just have my squat rack and the barbell, like maybe I just do one set of like 5 on squats and one set of 6 or whatever at an RP 8. And then that allows me, like knowing that about myself, if I do one hard set of squats today, but I also want to go to Los later in the week, I'll get leg press in and maybe another set of squats in while I'm at the gym. And that just, again, knowing that I have the capacity for something different in the future influences what I'm doing right now. Because the context in which I'm making that decision is from a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Like I'm going on a trip in 2 weeks. So it's okay if I'm a little bit overkill on my training because I'm not going to be training for 2 weeks. Like I'll have time to recover. And as long as I'm not creating like atrophy from just continued muscle damage, but I don't even know how likely that is. It does seem like that is a case where you can experience atrophy though, because like it seems like that is one way in which you could. It almost seems like it's easier to. I could be completely wrong, but if we think that like training causes muscle damage, if we continuously damage our muscles repeatedly without allowing for like a net positive protein synthesis rate, then that would be net negative, right?
Yeah, well, at some point, yeah. I think the body is much more resilient than a lot of people think.
Yeah.
But I noticed also it's like the relative change, So it's like, for instance, for me, when I trained so much, it was a very gradual, long increase. Whereas like you can, if you double your training volume, triple your training volume, like increase the RP by 2 and like do it within a week, like probably not the best idea.
Yeah, I saw Jamal did 18 singles at 1,000 pounds. So I did that, but for 500 pounds because I'm weaker. Yeah, that's a really good point. And it is something that we have to be aware of when we are like aroused, I guess, or excited by a new idea. If it's not rooted in material reality and it's just rooted in like idealism of what you wish you were, like who you wish you were, that's when people start to get frustrated. Because, like, for example, my athletes, some of my athletes, they'll look at other athletes as a way to drive their training decisions. Oh, that person's in the same weight class, so I'm able to do what they can do. That person's my age. That person's I'm same gender as me or whatever. Like, so I should be able to do that. But man, I can't tell you more than this. Your existence and your experience it should not be reduced to your age and to your gender. What you're capable of performing and responding well to should not be reduced to those 2 things. And so I almost think it might be valuable for a lot of people to just if you're influenced by other people's training decisions that aren't you, and you don't know anything about their context other than their age and their training weight, maybe unfollow them, because it might not be, that information might not be productive for your goals. But I mean, do what you want, but just be aware of that. I always look at other people in my weight class that are like younger than me, but my, same weight, and they're stronger than me, and they're doing a lot more than me. I'm like, damn, that's crazy. But also it's super cool. I can't do that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I noticed that like there was a time where I was like, it was like a pendulum, like you look a lot at other people and then maybe like you just do your own stuff. And now it's like it has, for instance, for me, become like more an inspiration. Like, for instance, when I trained with Tyson, like recently, like my pull strength has not been great, like upper body pull strength. And it is like, I guess, like partially related to the fact that I'm 20 pounds heavier than like when I pulled my PRs, but like also like seeing him, for instance, do a pull-up.
Love pull-ups.
Love pull-ups. So yeah, for instance, like with like other lifters now, I use them much more as like an inspiration. So it's like, it's almost like a creative impulse. So you try something out, but it's like you're open to the fact that you need to adapt it for yourself. Yeah. And this is actually nice. It's not like, a comparative aspect, but more so like an aspect of like, oh, it is really interesting how they like squat. Like, let me try, because maybe something within you tells you like it might actually work for me pretty well. I remember actually one of the productive examples for me has been seeing Dan Griggs deadlifting. And that was the first time, like I always experimented with a wider stance in sumos, and it has never felt nice. And in my last prep, I looked exactly on how he wedged his hips into the bar, and also like how much he abducted, and like just like in general, like what it looked like. And I didn't do it as extreme as he did, but I slightly adjusted my technique. And it ended up feeling really, really nice. So it's like, this was like an inspirational or like creative impulse.
Fuel, as Mike used to say. Yeah.
But I feel like this can be productive, but like, obviously, like if you're lost in like comparison and a lot of like other variables are missing, then yeah, it's usually just like frustrating.
I also think it's really incredible how much environment plays a role in like what is exciting to you and what's motivating and what gets like what allows you to have a good session. Like, I mean, dude, when we trained yesterday, I hadn't squatted much like the last few months, and I hit 4 or 5 for 4, which I've never done before. I probably could have done it before in the past, but I hadn't. And I was just like, yo, I'm going to do this. I got Tyson and Seba to spot me. Like, I wouldn't do that here by myself. Yeah. I'm like the risk of not succeeding is a lot higher when I'm at by myself in my own laundry room. If I fucking fall, like that's not going to be good. So, it's actually a suggestion I made to one of my athletes yesterday, because there's a lot of more life stress adding up in the summer, a lot of different things, variables. And there's another gym that they used to go to that has a lot of machines and has a lot of different equipment that they just don't have exposure to. And like pain has been a variable for them. And that we kind of came to the conclusion that it might be good to train at that gym for a few weeks, kind of reset mentally, physically, and environmentally, to see if that gets them out of that rut. Because a big topic that I think resonates with a lot of people, but they might not understand it at first, is to recognize if you're in a positive feedback loop with your training or a negative feedback loop. Because once that spiral begins, it's a lot easier to stop it when you can recognize it quickly. If you're 8 weeks into a negative feedback loop, you haven't changed anything, you keep beating your head against the wall or whatever that phrase is, the roots are a lot stronger.
Yeah, it takes longer to pull back out.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I think one of my most like the phrases which really like stuck with me is when you were like always talking about like nourishing training. And it's like having nourishment and like enjoyment as like a guide, and it's like, obviously not every session is like, hell yeah, bro, like I'm gonna do like every set is so nice, but it's like there is a general sense of like, you know, for instance, like you're done with your training and like, oh, like satisfaction, right? Like I pushed through, this was kind of nice, and now I'll have a nice dinner. But like there's also the sense of like, no, I'm gonna eat. But like there's also the sense that like a long session is just like, all right, I did it, but it was like, you know, like, I don't know, like didn't like this didn't feel great. My performance maybe went down because I was overly fatigued going into it, and I still pushed and shit like that. And this has been like really big guide for me, like nourishing training. And I feel like it can also be used in the framework, because nourishing can be, you know, used in like nourishing for, you know, high performing athletes. You know, it would just look different, but it's still, you know, it's still different than maybe like beating yourself up to a point where it's not useful anymore. I don't know why, but I like the label nourishing a lot. It's been so helpful. Because useful for a lot of people immediately has this completely like impersonal sense, you know? And nourishing is like, oh, like I can take myself into the equation as well. Cool.
Sounds like, I don't know, like more exploitative to your body.
Yeah, it's like,
yeah. Like, how do I get use out of this? One of the things that I think about is like, on top of, so like, I think that idea of nourishment is such a good idea, a good word, because it's associated with health and with like satisfaction and food and vegetables and, you know, growth.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, another phrase that I like to use is like, what movement, what protocol, what combination of variables would allow you to get something positive out of the session? And again, not like useful, but like when you leave the session, you have something to reflect on in a positive manner. Mm-hmm. I feel like if you leave a session and there hasn't been anything positive about it, it really messes with you. It can mess with you.
Yeah.
So like, even if your main squat doesn't go as well, or it felt weird, or you weren't happy with it, something that I like to do is like, okay, this isn't where I'm going to get that nourishment. The squat isn't where the nourishment is going to come from, but man, do I want to feel my quads right now? I didn't feel my quads on the squat. It felt like it was my hips. I'm going to do some leg press. I'm going to do some leg extension. I'm going to make sure that I feel good, like before I leave. Yeah. And I mean, again, a lot of people might be like, oh, well, you know, sometimes you're going to have to feel bad. Yeah. I mean, you might feel bad, but you don't have to only feel bad, you know, like squatting will be good eventually if it feels bad today, but I want something to feel good today.
I noticed this is one of the biggest reasons for me why I never stuck to one identity in strength sports. Yeah. Because I was like, sometimes I will squat, but I'm just like, man, like those squats were really not it, you know? And it's just like, if you have bodybuilding work afterwards, like, oh, cool. Like I have these things I can do. Or like, for instance, if you branch out and like some of your bodybuilding work is also like, you know, influenced by like calisthenics, like pull-ups, chin-ups, dips, whatever. And maybe like by strongman stuff or stuff like that. Not in a manner that it is like disjointed, but like integrated. Yeah. It's like, oh, like this felt really kind of nice today, you know, like I could work around these things. But like once you're like having this really ingrained identity, sometimes it's difficult to branch out because it will be not conducive to where I want to go. And I'm like, sometimes you don't know that. It's just like that you're so constricted with the identity that like you will never know, you know, till you try.
It's also I think, again, a byproduct of like the education that a lot of powerlifters get about like the idea and the concepts of like specificity, you know, and like, I think it's really, that's a concept that I think is so vague that, you know, what is something that is a specific movement? Like technically it's like a movement that emulates the squat, bench, or the deadlift. Like something that's closer to the single out of 10 would be like the most specific movement hypothetically would be a bench press, squat, or deadlift for 1 rep at RP 10. But when you're training, like we're training to build and develop and improve our ability to perform a single at RP 10. We're not just in the gym to like practice that specific thing, or everyone would be doing singles at 10 no matter what. So when it comes to like powerlifting goals, typically, and for everyone, mostly, it's like, I want to get better at my squat, bench, and deadlift. I want my estimated max to improve. And so then in my mind, like something that's specific it's specific to the goal then instead of specific to the exercise. So the specific, I have 2 ideas here. One is like, what's the global objective of your training, which in this case would be like improving your 1 rep max for squat, bench, and deadlift. within that umbrella, we have specific objectives that we can utilize on a day, or the actions that we talked about earlier that would align with that global objective. And so a leg press very much could be that movement pattern that is needed to improve the 1 rep max squat, because maybe the quads could benefit from having a bit more mass, and the competition squat minimizes your ability to recruit like the most mechanical tension possible in your quads, whereas the leg press is more or less an isolation movement for your quads, and you can push a lot more weight, and like that could be the movement. So that might be actually the most specific movement for your goal in that moment. And even if it's not a barbell movement, that doesn't necessarily mean you won't get anything from it. And I mean, there's a lot more on that idea, but the idea of specificity, I think, really messes with people.
It does, yeah.
With their head.
I mean, one of the really good examples is, for instance, like recognizing that for me, like volume is actually a big driver for my strength. Mm-hmm. And like even like to the point where like I feel like the last meet I went into, like I had like more polarized approach. I only had like usually 1/4 of my training where, like, for instance, like in the end I did like a double or single, which was also not super high RPE. The rest of the work was much lighter. And to the point where I'm like, even at a point now where I'm like, oh, I may even go even more on the side of like higher volume. And for instance, recently I noticed I have more access now again to like machines, like hex squats and stuff like that. And 5 or 6 years ago, most of my like I had a lot of volume from accessory work plus main lifts. But now, for instance, I notice if my legs get a volume stimulus from hex squats, pendulum squats, mostly like exercises where I have a lot of tension in the lengthened position, like those two, and I do like a higher volume, higher rep-ish set, my legs, for whatever reason, have such a strength potential that when I do deadlifts or squats, I'm the strongest and most powerful I can be. Because if I try to like generate that type of like volume through the main lift itself, I'm too fatigued. Like my lower back is wrecked, like everything is wrecked. And it's like, in that sense, like that setup feels for me like more specific, even for pulling high 1RM loads, than if I would like end up like even, you know, doing a bunch of volume in main lifts, which is not even considered super specific for a lot of people. So it's like, in a way, like looking at the program, it's like, you know, the exercise selection is not super specific, but like the individual response I get out of it for my goals is specific. Yeah. And I think that took me a while to recognize, because I clung so much to the idea of like, oh, linear periodization, it needs to get heavier the closer I get to the meet. And every time I did it, I was like,
less exercise variation.
Yeah. And I was like, dude, like every time I did it, I was like, why the fuck am I weaker, you know, closer to the meet than when I do like my high volume sets? It's like, it's not like, some people are like, well, maybe like you know, like you needed this like stricter technique or shit like that. But it's like, dude, like if I squatted, I know it's just a random number, but it's like I squatted this like 200 for 10 and now I'm squatting 205 for 3. It's like, I'm certainly not stronger now. Like, it's like, if I can do so many more reps with that weight, like my raw strength was just higher. Yeah. And I think this is true for more people, you know, like more people than, you know, it's true. Like, it's like,
it's crazy. I mean, that's literally what Tyson and I did leading up to our meet. Like,
I wanted to say, like, Seba, you like describing your experience in your like last powerlifting meet, like it gave me permission to like kind of trust my own experience. Mm-hmm. Like going into the powerlifting meet, I was doing, my primary driver for my strength was like my competition squat's a low bar squat. My primary squatting driver was a high bar pause squat for like sets of 8 to 10 to 12. But it was such a potent stimulus. I was like adding weight and reps every week for weeks that like every time I tested my comp squat, it was like higher.
Yeah.
And then like same with my sumo deadlifts, I like was doing sets of 10 to 12, like pretty close to the meet. But it was just like, because I was adding weight and reps like every week, it was like a potent stimulus for me. Like it was like driving my deadlift, even though I wasn't, and I was getting just, you know, enough practice and enough exposure with heavyweight light reps that I had confidence in like holding the weight and my grip and stuff. But like I was doing things really far away from specific work and I was getting stronger. And I wouldn't have, it was so much easier for me to trust my experience because I like knew that that's how you responded.
Yeah. And it maybe one interesting fact is that like the evidence, when I went into that, there was a point where I actually analyzed some of my own data. And I noticed that I took all of the data from like my successful time also when I did like a bunch of volume, a bunch of training. And I noticed that my exposure to heavy weights in most cases less than 25%. So it's like, for instance, when I squatted 3 times a week and I also had a shit ton of like lower body accessory work, a lot of heavy sets, but in the context of my overall training, it never was more than 25%. And I was like, this is really interesting because, for instance, when I like gave myself more recovery for like, I don't know, just like power lifts, for instance, and that recovery came from cutting out the high volume sets, the relative, like, I guess, like space for like the higher intensity lifts like grew. So it was like a third or like half of my training, even though my general workload was lower. And my strength like decreased. And it was really fascinating because in a way it was not something where I was like, okay, it needs to be like 25% of my training is like maybe like more specific, like quote unquote specific in terms of like heavier set, like X, Y, and Z, and the rest is like higher volume or like different exercise, even what you described was like the high bar pause. But I was like, it almost like analyzing it that way was like, oh, this actually tracks with my intuition. So it was almost like it allowed myself to like my formal analysis of my own data actually showed me like there is something behind that. And then I moved more into that. I was like, oh, okay, like let me think like how much heavy work do I actually need? And, you know, I ended up like, for instance, when I did like my heavy comp days, I had like one lighter day where I just like did more explosive type of work. Then I had one day where I had like 3 to 4 sets where I had like one set was like heavier work. One set was like a heavier, like it, meaning a higher RPE, high rep set. And then I had like 1 or 2 lighter back offs. So it was 3 sets with higher reps. The 2 of them were higher RPE, and the first one was actually higher relative intensity. And that worked so well for me. And it was based on analysis and then verified by intuition. This is something where like, I don't know, like just for you saying like analysis and blog reviews where like, you know, analysis was very useful for me because it gave me like the confirmation or the confidence to try it out. Yeah. It was not like I randomly did something and went into the meet and was like lucky, but I was like, well, you know, that just tracks with what I've been doing. And I've been reading a book and I've been really liking his analogy. He like, the author pretty much says like, you know, just because you have visual distortions doesn't mean you don't use your eyes anymore. You know, and this is true for like all the different like mental faculties we have. Logic is not bulletproof, although a lot of people think it is. But for instance, there's like paradoxical things which are true, but they're paradoxical to logic, you know, and like intuition has its pitfalls. Like for instance, with the book Thinking Fast and Slow, this is like one of the primary examples which like talks about like intuition as like not being like great. But it's like all of these things, in my opinion, only show that like, well, they have all, you know, benefits and side effects. The problem is if you become dogmatic about it, because if you then say like, you know, my eyes have visual distortions, in the future I will just not use them and just walk around smelling, you know, that doesn't really work well. But it's like, this is where like, I don't know, like I constantly started to like analyze intuition, you know, I don't know, feel. It's like use everything we have to offer.
Yeah, use it all. Use the quote unquote objective data, you know, the numbers, and then also use your feelings, your sensations, your like there's so, I mean, when we talk about strength, like, you know, you say, oh, my raw strength's improved. Something that I find is really interesting is like strength expression is a specific, it's like, it's specific to the environment, to your current state of mind, to your current like your current capability. And like Tyson and I always joke that like gravity's heavier at home gym.
Dude,
like,
for real,
you know?
When I lifted at your home gym, I was like, damn.
Yeah.
It's like, what the hell?
What's happening? And I mean, I have a few ideas why, but regardless, now our association with training here is like, it might not be the best session. Or it's going to be lighter than I want it to be, and I need to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
But rarely do I want it to be lighter than it could be, you know? Like, which is why I got really pumped to train at Los yesterday, because I didn't have to squat here. I mean, I have to work on my own relationship with training here and accepting of the differences. But my ability to express strength is not something that is like, it isn't like it's raw, but it's also constantly changing.
Dynamic.
It's dynamic.
Yeah.
But the more you do it, the more you also get the evidence of knowing, like, when you're somewhere else, you know that you can perform better. And I feel like that makes you also be like more content with maybe not going as high here.
Knowing when to push.
When to push. And I remember, like, for instance, like when I was really like grinding in my training, I had like my favorite squat rack. I had like all of these favorite things where I knew I could perform well, quote unquote. And whenever I went to even like a different gym, even though it maybe was a cool gym, I was thrown off, you know? And like I still pushed hard and usually then had consequences the next time, because like I should have maybe gone down just by like 20 pounds, but I was like, no, bro, like I need to progress this week too. And then it was like, you know, like overshot RPE by 3 or shit like that. It's like, well, that's just what you gotta do.
I think that the concept that it takes a while to really internalize, but just like the idea that stress is, as you brought up earlier, like stress is the driver, load is a way to impact stress. But like if the perceived stress is higher here when I squat less weight, like there's nothing I can do about that. It's just how it is. So if I like reach the RPE within the conditions that I've got going on, typically that's still going to result in a similar response. It's just I have to, again, talking about the feedback loop, if I don't recognize that it was okay that I squatted 20 pounds less here, I won't see that as a win. I'll see it as a loss. And even though it is like, well, it wouldn't be a win if I don't think it's a win and I start manifesting those feelings and those thoughts. And then I stop training here because I'm like, oh, I can't squat as much. Like, well, I won't train at all here. I mean, this is where I train most of the time. It's where I have the most opportunity. So I think athletes could really learn from that as well, like from the accepting of the stimulus in the environment and what that means to you, but also recognizing that it's not always like proof or an indicator that you're going to perform poorly at a meet because, you know, a less ideal environment that isn't competition like, you aren't able to express strength as much. And another thing is, something that made me feel really confident leading into RLS competition was that like I hadn't even tried to create or replicate competition specific conditions leading into the meet, but I had such high confidence that like being surrounded by a bunch of judges and people watching me, like in music and being with the homies, that I would have as much excitement and belief in myself that I would need to push something satisfactory. Whereas that's not the case most of the time when I train. And like there's a boost from that, like a psychological and environmental boost. And since the taper happened too, there's a physiological boost. Like I don't have the fatigue coming. Like believing in those things does take experience and experiments. Experience and experiments, because if you don't know what you feel like when you're at a meet, and you're not going to be like, oh, I know I'm going to do well. So it's not that you shouldn't like be nervous. It's just there are a lot of things that you might not realize that impact your ability to express strength that do impact your ability to express strength. And like if you can bring awareness to what are the conditions required for expressing strength and building strength, those two things, if you're a powerlifter, will, I think, create a much healthier relationship with your training.
Mm-hmm. And I think having that training enjoyment that matches your conditions, like from my experience, like it feels like optimal. Mm-hmm. Like it like clearly leads to results. Like Seba hasn't seen me for a little over a year. And like the last time he saw me in June of whatever,
in May last year.
Like we have pictures for that you took of me,
really,
like in the Tampa gym.
Oh, right.
And
do you remember how heavy you were back then? By the way, I know you had more body fat too, but
yeah, I think I weighed like 190 with more body fat. Yeah.
What are you now? 205?
Like 198 to 202.
202. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So he gained like 20 pounds of lean mass in like a year.
Yeah. And it's like, that's uncommon. And it's like especially like, I don't have any extra special sauce. Like, it's like, and then like I have close friends who do like, no judgment to that. It's just like to accomplish that as a training age of like 15, Like I started training when I was 13.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah, the whole idea of like, you know, at some point you're gonna gain less muscle than at others, like it just doesn't seem.
I have less certainty about
Yeah, I have less certainty too. I feel like when you like, unless your conditions are ideal when you're young training,
Yes.
then I don't think that that's something to be like, oh no, I'm older now.
It can be a self-limiting belief.
Yeah. Like, dude, I think even I've gained more muscle in the last year than I have my whole training career. More fat too, but like at least my upper body, I feel much more satisfied about like my bicep size and my chest size. My back is bigger. Like
Your tricep is bigger too.
it's been growing, and it's also a lot because I'm like, man, my chest doesn't feel great today. I'm gonna do tricep extensions.
Yep,
or
exactly.
I've never done that before. I never used to do that in my training. I used to be like, well, I can't do my main lift, so I'm gonna go home. Now I'm like, oh shit, bench feels weird, but I want to push my triceps. It's gonna be fun. You know,
Get a big
Tyson. Like that's something that you guys both helped me with, because before working with Zao Strength, like before coming into this, you know, company, forming it with Tyson and you guys. RTS's framework of like having a main lift, a supplemental or like assistance lift and a supplemental SDE, SP, whatever. I never would treat the SPEs so like movements that focus on exercises that focus on like muscle, I guess, which is kind of a weird category, but like let's say a bicep curl versus a barbell row, you know, like the isolation based movements, I guess. I would never treat those with respect.
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, I got tricep extensions. Okay, I'll do 15 of RPs 4 and move on. Now I'm like, come on, let's fucking go, you got this, you know? And it feels so fun. Like it's so much more fun. And weirdly, it seems to make it so I don't need as much raw or competition benching work, which I didn't believe was a thing. Like weirdly enough, getting bigger muscles makes it easier to express strength on barbell.
There's untapped potential there.
Yeah,
like you're building up a pool of untapped potential that once comp bench does feel good.
Yeah.
Oh, I got some gas now.
Yeah. Really. I mean, without trying that hard, I've been able to maintain, and I've not like I think I hit 315 for a double the other day, and that was like 3 weeks after the meet, and I didn't really train much, but I shifted my focus on just dumbbell benching. Like I hit it all time dumbbell bench PR, 100 pounds for like 7. Never did that before. Like, I don't know. It's just that the shift in framing of all the movements has, I mean, I'm not like the best anecdote. Like, I don't know how many people care how strong I am, but like my own enjoyment and my own relationship with myself and with my body and with my strength is so much more positive, even if like objectively, my strength isn't like wildly different than 2 years ago, but the rate of pain and soreness and discomfort and like a lack of enjoyment is not there. So like, I'm so much more excited to go to the gym. And I think regardless of what happens for absolute strength levels, like enjoyment and training sustains me. It sustains the journey.
And sometimes, I mean, like what I said with the hack squats, for instance, and like my strength potential, you know, sometimes discover certain relationships where you're like, like I would have never thought that, for instance, when I didn't bench and like maybe just do like some tricep extensions and flies, that if I miss one session and I come back the next session, that maybe like all of a sudden my bench moves really, really good. Because I notice sometimes like, you know, maybe like I'm just not able to express my strength well because maybe some stabilizers are really fatigued. Like for instance, like, you know, my piriform is like in my hips or something like that. So I do like a bunch of assistance work, and for whatever reason, like it really maintains the strength in my quads well and my like glutes. And then I come back, the stabilizers are fresh, and I do a main lift session. I'm like, dude, I'm literally stronger than when I would have probably squatted like last week. And the same is true with stuff like tricep work, like chest work, where sometimes you're like, you know, it's not supplementary. Like sometimes it can literally be like what you need in that moment.
It's the main lift.
It's the main lift for the day.
That's something, man. If everyone can get on board with that, like any lift can be the main lift for your session for the week. That is the necessary thing to drive the overall goal. Man, it's incredible what can happen. I mean, I had a lifter that couldn't do comp bench because their neck was in pain. So we just did feet up bench. We did just feet up bench for like 5 weeks. Come back once their neck is no longer in pain, and like 2 weeks later they hit 130 kilos on the bench as like a 76 kilo female lifter, like all-time PR.
Boy.
Yeah, it's crazy. And like, I mean, because I don't know, man. If you think about what is it that allows you to express strength, you have the biological, you have the tissues, the structures in the tissues that allow, like you said, untapped potential. So if you're training the muscles that are involved in the movement, I don't understand how that wouldn't contribute to more strength.
Yeah.
Something like a feet up bench requires a similar level of proprioceptive awareness in the scapula and the shoulders, et cetera, bringing the bar down to the chest. But it didn't cause that negative feedback loop that would have otherwise happened with competition benching where they were frustrated about their neck, So like, or dumbbell bench. We did dumbbell benching at the same time. And that felt great in that we could push and like it stimulates the muscles. It doesn't cause that same depending on how you do it. But I find it's such a unique way to press compared to a barbell that it's novel. I get excited. It's kind of scary. There's definitely like a risk there, but just like the difference in the novelty and then coming back to like, oh, I get to use my legs again with the comp bench and I have more muscle and I haven't lost my technical acuity, that's those are the conditions for strength. I think it's like, and the fatigue is gone. The pain is gone. Your body will limit yourself artificially or whatever if you're feeling pain in a tissue that is needed to produce force. Like whether you do it like yourself or I don't know, like seeing how it works, but dude, I'm not stronger squatting with my quad feeling like it's tearing than when it isn't feeling like that, Like that's just not ever going to be the case. And there's just so much, a lot of things that contribute, but this kind of hoping we've debunked the idea that like the only way to get stronger is if you do singles out of 10 for the main lifts. And like, you have to always do the main lifts because I think that idea of the stabilizing muscles are just like, the fact that you have to control the bar down on a squat and your upper back is involved, your core is involved. And if anything in that chain feels really uncomfortable, it's likely that you're going to limit the at least the stress on like the quads, or maybe like something won't be stimulated as much as it could be. But if you eliminate that one variable of like stability and do machine-based movement, well, then you no longer have that discomfort. You can shift yourself back into that positive feedback loop. And
I think a lot of people are also really uncomfortable like with the fact that maybe on some days they don't know why things are off.
Yeah.
So it's like they do something and it's like it could be the stabilizers, but it could also be something else. They just squat and they're like, it does not feel good today. And we have such a tendency because we're so like attached to like theory that we're like, I need to know why before I give myself the permission to not do it. Yeah. And I think this is where like sometimes really distrust comes in that like, your intuition, if you work with it, is like a valid point of evidence, because sometimes like, you don't know till later and sometimes you never know, but it's like you start to gain experience of like, oh, like I trusted my intuition and that was like fruitful. Like I may not know why, I can generate hypotheses, it's like sometimes, for instance, like you're tired on a day and you're like, I have no idea why. Like maybe I have like sleep apnea, or like it was the food, or like it was because I had 2 glasses of wine yesterday, or like all of these things. But the interesting thing is that actually knowing why doesn't change anything about the fact that you have it in that particular moment. It's just that mentally, we really want to control the outcome. So we're like I need to know why before I'm like, actually doing what feels good, And I mean, to be fair, like sometimes we also have a tendency to like deceive ourselves. And I think this is where like reasons and causes can be helpful, because if you know why, you're like, okay, it's like, it's not like a stupid decision to make. But I guess the whole point why like we're also emphasizing intuition so much is that like we're not, like I guess most people, they're not balanced. It's not like that we're like, people are like, theory and analysis on the one side and there's like intuition, and most people like, are on the middle ground. It's like a lot of people are really stuck in like the like more like theory heavy side.
If it wasn't in a study, then it's not good.
Yeah, and it's like you kind of like need to emphasize these points. Permission of like, oh, yeah, I experienced this, I had days where I like did this and it didn't feel nice, and like I still did it because I couldn't find a cause. Like I was like, could be my ass, could be my back, could be my disc, could be everything, could be my shoes, could also be like, emotionally like this.
And this guy high, the radon in the gym making the gravity feel a lot heavier.
It's just like, working with what is, and like, and it's difficult, it's like stepping back sometimes and like recognizing that the theory doesn't help you right now is not easy, but it's like you got to do it at some point, because otherwise you're just like sitting there like ruminating, like, should I do like triple, double, 4 different exercise? And it's like, if you sometimes like wouldn't ruminate, you would just like go to a different exercise, like try the leg press, and you're like, oh, that feels kind of nice,
It's so valuable to have like just someone, like to be able to talk to someone about your training. Like I didn't have a coach going to my powerlifting meet, but I had these experiences that I could like talk to Jim, talk to Seba, because I could have that like creative problem solving. It just like totally changed the way I was relating to it.
Mm-hmm. Like, man, one conversation can change everything.
Yes.
And it happens all the time with calls with my clients. Like they're in pain before the call, I talk with them for an hour. They're like, I don't feel it anymore because I feel better about everything. I've accepted it or whatever. And like, one of the things you said about like theory, I think another aspect is like, again, we've been really pushing like, or promoting the importance of understanding the biopsychosocial model in relation to strength expression and our like everyday lives, like whatever the goal is. If you've recognized the impact of the biological, psychological, and the sociological / environmental, then you can better understand the why. But if you don't have any formal experience or theory or education in biological processes or in psychological like theory or sociological theory, then your intuition is limited to the education that you have on a specific topic. So like if you're very biomechanical, like evidence-based, but you have no idea how your mind influences your biomechanics, your biology, then you're missing out. Like that's a part of the reflection, maybe that like spending some time, maybe hours, weeks, months, learning more about things like self-determination theory. Or shit, man. I mean, Seba's literally going to his master's degree for psychology, not so he can necessarily improve his training, but I reckon that's helped a lot. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I was thinking about training 50 hours a week after my master's, and then including psychology knowledge,
or like a study session in the middle.
Yeah.
Intuition is like a fire that relies on like your intuition can only be as good as your frameworks. Like it builds on the blocks that you put on it.
Yeah.
And so if you have no framework, you have no fire.
It's maybe it's a small ember buried underneath rain coated dirt that somehow is still burning. And I guess that could be you. And if it is you, maybe you gotta find that fire. Build a bigger one, and learn more things.
I have to hop out of here.
Yeah.
So in closing, if you're struggling to use your intuition, like how the fuck do I use my intuition? What are these feelings?
Yeah.
Like, that's where it's like, reach out to a coach, like find someone who like aligns to your values, is aware of these things, like hit up the Zao strength team. Like it's being able to talk about these things with someone is like a game changer to training. Like it really changes the way you relate to your training, to your own body. It's life changing.
It is.
Yeah. You learn different modes of knowing too. Like, to bring in a slightly different concept, but for instance, in philosophy, like in epistemology, you have like different modes of knowing, and there's, for instance, like propositional knowing, participatory knowing, perspectival knowing. And like theory is like propositional knowing. It's like propositions we make about the world. It's like theory concepts. But like, for instance, what intuition does is like you have something called participatory knowing. Like you participate in the process, and you notice that the participation in the process itself creates its own kind of knowing, But this is like where we're like so like when we're so stuck in theory, where we like sometimes don't recognize or don't value different modes of knowing. And for instance, with a coach, I think the biggest value lies in perspectival knowing. You gain a different perspective through somebody else, which doesn't mean that they're like the authority imposing their perspective on you. But like, if you have a good relationship with them, you can be the leader in taking in their perspective and take what is valuable and leave what is not.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Relates to you, or,
Yep.
you know, yeah.
Yep.
Cool, everyone. Well, thank you for listening to another wonderful episode expanding on our own intuition in relation to intuitive training. If you have questions, make sure you follow. Well, if you have questions, you can follow us on Instagram and ask any of us questions. Seba, Jim, and Tyson.Southstrength. If you're listening to this on Spotify, we have a lot of videos coming out on YouTube. Just search YouTube. YouTube.com/Southstrength, and we will see you and talk to you in the next one. Peace.
Before I go though, I want an idea I had was that we should take a picture for the thumbnail.
Oh yeah.